only reason I survived was because I healed myself every single day. I made a mission that no matter if I was being beaten up or tortured or whatever was going on, I spoke to myself like my own personal champion, like my own personal advocate, with so much love, so much compassion, so much kindness.
Hey guys, it's Matt Haycox here, and welcome to another episode of the Matt Haycox Show. And today I've got a guest who's joining us to talk about all things wellness and the importance of looking after our minds, bodies and souls. I think my soul needs a bit of work, a bit of cleansing. She is an award-winning writer, podcaster, international speaker, and all-around expert on everything to do with stress management, Reiki, mindfulness, and holistic performance coach. She's a co-author of the best-selling book, The Law of Brand Attraction, and I know there's going to be loads of valuable insights to take away from today's chat. So it's a hugely important area that we could all get to know more about. So welcome to the show, Alice Law.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, thanks a lot for being here. I mean, I guess, to contextualise the time, I mean, we are, mid-October 2020. We're very, very deep into COVID time, and mental health, something that's becoming talked about. Well, it was heavily talked about prior to COVID, but I think particularly now, as everyone's getting more and more pissed off with being locked in the houses, and you'll hear anything from mental health issues are increasing through to mental health issues are a ticking time bomb waiting to go off because of COVID. So I guess it's a great time to be talking about this. I mean, just to set the scene for you, fashion designer to stress expert, mindfulness coach, etc. I mean, how did that journey happen?
Yeah, it was not what I planned, that's for sure. But it was, I wanted to be a fashion designer. Thought I went to go and work for Net-a-Porter briefly after uni. Thought I wanted to set up my own line. Needed to get a job on the side, so I went to go and work for a Russian finance company as a PA to earn some money, and then was starting to do my designing of my line, and then basically just got completely sideswiped by life events. And so I experienced what I call stress in every dimension of my life at once. So our eldest sister sadly got cancer, and that was a 4-year battle. And then we sadly lost her to cancer. And at the same time, our dad very sadly was under a lot of pressure financially from businesses, lost his companies, had to sell our homes. And it was just sort of completely, when you think the rug's been pulled out from underneath you. And I watched my dad really, really suffer with depression. Later got made redundant myself because my bosses moved abroad, had a breakup. Just all these things kept happening. And I realized I needed to cope with stress differently. Otherwise I wasn't gonna, make it. I was very anxious all the time.
And how were you coping at the time? I mean, were you kind of learning to cope for yourself, or were you taking advice and external input?
Yeah, I mean, at first I was doing the classic thing that everyone does, distraction, just going out too much, exactly, and then just making myself even more anxious. And because I was 25 at the time, when it was around that time that I just didn't get noticed because everyone was doing it, do you know what I mean? But I wasn't doing the right things for myself. And I realized that something had to change, and I was like, right, I just started learning everything that I now do. So I just delved into mindset work, mindfulness. I think the first podcast I listened to was Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, and all the amazing guests she took, has on. And I just started to develop a new way of thinking, being and doing, and stumbled across energy healing, which I didn't know. You didn't know what the hell that was before.
Is that the Reiki?
Yeah, exactly. And realized how they all pulled me out of this, and how I needed to then use that. So I started to, and having, we lost our dad to stress-related illness just over a year ago. And for me, I realised how important that is.
And obviously, I know it's probably a raw point still, but so I don't want to delve too deep in it for you. But just so we understand, I mean, what does, what is a stress-related illness that takes your life?
I mean, Dad, he got cancer again, but that wasn't actually even what took his life. He actually died from a burst stomach ulcer that caused internal complications.
Okay.
And
a stomach ulcer caused from stress.
Yeah, exactly. It was 5 years of stress, and I watched him. I think that was one of the greatest losses for me. It was watching him change from this charismatic, dynamic human, so happy, to someone who was just completely overwhelmed with stress and grief, and just watch that, really change his mind, his mindset, and then eventually his health, which was just really, really awful to see. And I just don't want other people to have to go through that themselves or watch people they love go through that, because there's so many things to help us now.
I mean, why do you think there's so much more awareness of it now? I mean, is it just that there's more awareness of it and it was always heavily there? Or is it, that there is genuinely more of it now because, I don't know, maybe life circumstances are making us more stressed, or and again, without, let's say, trivialising certain people's, mental health issues, do you think there's jumping on the bandwagon as well with a lot of people?
I think there's like the two sides to it, in that there's a lot more stress because we, for example, when we're stressed, you have macro and micro stresses. So macro are the big life events like we're talking about, divorce, death, losing a company, all these things. Micro are basically the little stress doses every single person in the Western world gets every day, unless they're Yoda on a beach.
I'm late for work.
Exactly, I'm late for work, I lost my car keys, the upsetting news headline, all these things. And these build up over time in the same way in your body and your mind as, the big ones do, unless they're dealt with. So our system's constantly been flooded with these things when we live in this world that we now do, where social media is everywhere and everyone's expected to be available all the time. So I think that change has really, seen an increase. But equally, when you say, people hopping on the bandwagon, I think with stress, everything is completely unique to your perspective that you've had. So what might cause me stress might not cause you stress. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. I mean, I had someone on my podcast who said his dad was always in hospital when he was younger. And then he didn't find hospital stressful because he grew up with it. But, when someone's thrown into that later in life, that's the most stressful thing they've dealt with because it's never been in their sort of like environment or their reality.
Well, I guess, a couple of questions, let's say from a personal perspective. I know we started to talk about this a little bit before we filmed. And, for me, I've had, I don't consider myself a stressful person in the slightest, but, I've had one or two major stressful events during my life. Was one which I talk about heavily was my bankruptcy issues back in 2008, and I guess there's been other things along the way which cause stress. But I guess for me, my combating of stress is understanding of a situation, is having a solution, is having certainty to that problem. And I know, like, a lot of the time I might be getting stressed because I've got 25 hours of work to do in 24 hours to do it, or whatever the expression is, and a lot of people turn around and say, oh, you need a holiday, you need to turn your phone off and go on a beach and relax. And my attitude is like, what fucking planet are you on? If I turn my phone off and go on a beach for a week, then I'm going to come back with another week's problems and more things, more issues on top. And for me, the solution is to fix those issues, to get the work done, to solve the problems, whatever it may be. Maybe not take any more on in the meantime so I can actually get that done. But all the mindfulness and meditation and dark rooms in the world isn't going to fix those problems for me. I need to practically get the stuff done. I mean, how does that situation compare to issues where people are, I guess, genuinely anxious and suffering, and maybe the problems aren't so solvable?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's like a long-winded story question, but does that make sense to get a question out of?
No, it does. I think, for example, what you were saying, you needing to deal with your problems in that situation, mindfulness and all those tools in that sense, what they help in that situation is help you to respond instead of react, so that you can actually perform better to the stressful situations that you're having to deal with at work, and you have that space in your mind. So meditation, for example, it weakens a center in our brain nicknamed the me center, which is basically your worry, your worry. And when you weaken that from meditation, that synapses, that connection, you actually find you have that space to pause within yourself, so you can actually deal with these stressful things more. But for extreme anxiety and stress and all these ongoing actual emotions that people are feeling and dealing with every day, I always say people, you wouldn't expect to have a shiny white smile and not brush your teeth, but everyone expects to feel amazing all the time, but they don't look after their minds or themselves. And so I think being responsible for the fact that we live in this society now that is so fast-paced, is so everything all the time, we actually have to start treating our mind, looking after it the same way you treat going to the gym. Make it as important as your body. That's the sort of key to it all. And then see how you have a sort of stable base to then deal with things off because these huge things are always going to arise. And I'd love to say that no one's ever going to experience stress. That's just not reality. But if we can learn to have this base, this strength to build, to deal, all these huge things that happen off, you end up dealing with it a lot better.
And like you say, obviously everyone has different things that stress them, and maybe different levels of what they can take. And I know obviously over your career and your life, you've met lots of interesting people who you've probably learned some lessons from. And we were talking about a couple before we started recording. Tell me about some of those interesting characters, those extreme situations, and I guess what you've been able to take away from it.
Yeah, I mean it's so I love hearing all these things from people. And I think one of the ones that really stuck with me most was a guy I had on my podcast. He's a man called Nick Yaris, who was on death row for 22 years in America for a crime he didn't commit, for the rape and murder of a woman he'd never even met, and he was put into prison at a time when DNA testing wasn't a thing, so it was just awful. That actually came out halfway through, and he was slipped a newspaper that said DNA testing's now a thing, and he thought, this is how I get off because I know I'm innocent. It took another 11 years. He was in Pennsylvania.
On death row for 33 years?
For 22, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And he was in Pennsylvania on a block that had legal active torture at the time. So he was tortured for something he didn't do for 22 years. Horrific conditions. He said guys committed suicide on the block every week, And I said, how did you survive? And there's such a thing in the wellness industry and, coaching industry, positive thinking and positive talk to ourselves. And I know the importance of it, but I never knew how important it was until he told me this. He was like, the only reason I survived was because I healed myself every single day. I made a mission that no matter if I was being beaten up or tortured or whatever was going on, I spoke to myself like my own personal champion, like my own personal advocate, with so much love, so much compassion, so much kindness, that I actually healed myself. And he didn't even have to see a therapist or anyone after that awful experience of leaving that. And I just thought that's the power of actually talking to yourselves well internally. People don't realize how much of an effect that internal conversation has on you. It's the same emotional reaction inside if you say something horrible to me now as if I say something horrible to myself or something nice, and that's the thing. How would you feel all day if you're going around and you had someone nice saying lovely things to you? You'd feel amazing when you came home. Equally, if you had someone following you around saying crap things to you all day, you'd feel, awful. And that's exactly what we're doing to ourselves internally. So the greatest thing to learn from him was just how powerful that is, and just being aware of how you're talking to yourself.
I mean, it's probably more a question for him than you, but I don't know if you know the answer. But was he saying, did he not feel different during the first 11 years as the second? Because I can kind of imagine the positivity in the second 11 years. When you've seen the DNA testing and you know there might be a route out. But for those first 11 years, I mean, he was just waiting to die every day, and he still kept himself positive.
Yeah, he just said he had to, because he was, he also looked out for someone he now recently has just got released from death row after advocating for him since then. And so he was like putting on something outside of myself, like kindness, as well as being kind to myself, was the two things that got me through it.
Any other stories, any other people you can share?
Yeah, something that I learned, we were talking about this earlier off camera, Mark and I were saying that a guy who I interviewed who has a smart supplement brand called The Heights, it's for your brain, and he had insomnia really badly and didn't understand why, and he was in tech at the time, and he then realized it was a nutritional imbalance in his brain from a protein. And so many people have sleep disorders and everything that people suffer with now, and I think it's so fascinating to know that this can actually just be like an imbalance of the things you need, the natural things you need. And that's now his whole brand. And it's, an amazing smart supplement called The Heights for your brain. And I think one of the main things I learned from him is just thinking about, going down the alternative routes instead of just thinking, right, I need to plaster on a prescription to this. So many people choose that option because it's the easy way instead of healing themselves naturally. And I'm not saying like there's not room for medicine. Of course, there absolutely is.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I was thinking when you were just talking about that where do you draw the line between stuff that can be solved, problems that can be solved with mindfulness, with meditation, with self-care, and when does something become a genuine medical issue that needs medicating? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's all down to trying it at the point where you're not at breaking point. So when you realize, okay, I need some help now, trying those alternative routes and seeing how it helps. And Reiki, for example, is actually the only alternative therapy that the NHS actually has for cancer patients and things like that. But so many people have this idea about Reiki being, it's too woo-woo, what even is Reiki? But these kind of things, they can complement, the other treatments. That's the point as well. You don't have to have an either or. And that's why I think having a holistic, approach to, your mindset and your health is really, really important.
So I always like to get some takeaways from these podcasts for my audience, and I know you've got a 5-minute morning routine. So that sounds a perfect training camp for it. What do we need to do, and what would it do for us?
Yeah, I mean, I will say this: before you do your morning routine, the first thing I can say to everyone is the biggest thing is just put your phone on airplane mode before you go to bed. And then don't put it back on until you've done your 5 minutes in the morning, because what that teaches your mind to do again is respond instead of react to the day. Because if you pick up your phone straight away and you see, upsetting headlines like they're everywhere at the moment, or those stressful emails, a million things you need to answer to, your brain automatically goes into react instead of response for the rest of the day. So you want to have that space for yourself. So do that, get an old school alarm or put your phone on airplane mode and have it away from you. And then just first thing I'd say is gratitude in the morning. So when you think of 5 things you're grateful for and you actually feel gratitude as well, it's always connecting the link of the feeling to the thought. So the physiology really ingrains it in your system. Then you want to think of 5 things and say them out loud or write them down. And what that again does is helps your subconscious look for the good and the rest of the day, the things to be grateful for instead of the things to be annoyed with.
Would you say that's typically like the same 5 things you think of before you start this process, and you're saying it every day, or do you kind of
No, they're different things.
Think on the spot?
Yeah, think on the spot, definitely. It's like, it can be your morning coffee that day, or something you think you're doing, someone you love, all these little things. And it doesn't have to be some huge thing. Like, even the smallest things really have an effect. Appreciating like your hot shower, all those little things. Then I always say, moving on to meditation. If, for the 5-minute one, just doing 2 minutes of breathing meditation. And that's simply, we don't breathe well when we're stressed. We breathe very shallowly. And what that tells our body is that we are under attack. So you want to say like everything's fine to your body and take some really deep breaths and breathe actually through your diaphragm instead of your chest. So just taking 2 minutes to think, breathe in through your nose. It's a breath sequence I do called the 4-4-8, because it's really simple to remember. Simply breathe in for 4, hold for 4, and out for 8. So you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And just, repeat that 3 times in the morning and just like ground yourself, just feel that calmness before you start. And then, you want to move on to the end is just an intention or an affirmative statement. So with an intention, setting up an intention for how you want your day to go. Whether that's a feeling like I intend to be happy today, or whether it's actually, you wanted to intend to have a good meeting if that's where you're going first. So set an intention, because that's a really powerful thing for your mind and your energy. So when it comes to energy, the expression is, focus goes where energy flows, and energy flows where focus goes. So if you set an intention, you're telling your mind and your energy that's what you want to get out of the day, and that's a really positive thing to start with.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. I will start by putting my phone on airplane mode. I think even before I meditate, I know that's. I'm always looking over at the bedside table through the night, and I think probably maybe a point to talk about earlier. But I know over the last year or so, I've very much tried to not get distracted by so many things like that. It's very easy. I know, like if I'm busy, when I sit down in front of the telly at night, I've always got, I don't so much anymore because I'm getting better, but up until a year or so, I'd always have my laptop there, kind of trying to do some emails, trying to do some work. But the reality is, for that 2 or 3 hours I'm looking at it, if I got 5 minutes useful work out of that 2 hours, it'd probably be top end. I think it is then trying to put the effort into relaxing and concentrating on having the quality time rather than the quantity time.
Yeah, definitely.
But thanks a lot for being here. Obviously, you had some really interesting points and some really interesting advice. Where can people hear more, find more? Where can they listen to your podcast?
Yeah, thank you. It's Lawali Life, so it's my name backwards.
You're gonna have to spell
seeing
that.
Things from a different perspective. It's Lawali. And then Life, Life, and that's my name for my podcast and Instagram, and my website, and also LinkedIn and Facebook. So it's all under that name and my name, Alice Law. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, thanks a lot for being here. And guys, thanks a lot for listening. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed listening to Alice as much as I did. I'm definitely going to look forward to trying some meditation with my phone turned off tomorrow morning. If you like the podcast, make sure you press like. If you don't already subscribe to the YouTube channel, please subscribe. You can get us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts, YouTube, Insta, everywhere. So make sure you check it out and tell your friends. And I look forward to seeing you again next time. Hey guys, it's Matt Haycox here, and welcome to another episode of the Matt Haycox Show. It's a live one today, not recorded on live for a while, so exciting and nervous in equal measures. But I'm here today with Rachel Kelly. Rachel is a best-selling author, she's a keynote speaker, media commentator, and she's a mental health expert, and also quite specifically, she's an ambassador for Rethink Mental Health, Rethink Mental Illness, the SANE, for the Counselling Foundation, and for Head Talks. And I mean, look, mental health is very topical at the moment. It's Mental Health Awareness Day. I think Rachel was saying in about 10 or 11 days' time. But I think, for me, mental health is something we hear about day in, day out, whether it's on Instagram, in the media, in the workplace, whether it's a work thing, a social thing, a family thing. I don't think there's anyone nowadays who hasn't been affected in some way, shape or form by mental health. So when I was offered the chance to get Rachel on here, I obviously jumped at it. So Rachel, thanks a lot for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It also sounds a bit daunting, all that list of things. I suppose when I say I'm an expert, the word expert comes from experience, and I think that's what I've got. Maybe I hope I can offer to listeners is just a bit of an experience of what this whole world is about. So yeah, that's where I come in.
Just before we get into the specifics of mental health and your story about that particularly, take us back to the beginning. I think your career started in journalism. Just give us a bit of context.
Yeah. So I was a sort of quite a sort of driven, quite high achieving sort of type. I went to a sort of competitive school. Went to school in London, St Paul's Girls' School. Went to Oxford, and then I joined the Times newspaper in my early 20s in the newsroom. So it's quite a high pressure job, but quite exciting. And all seemed to be well for a bit. But then my mental health story really started in my 30s when I had my first major depressive episode. And I crashed and burned pretty badly, ended up in hospital. So I could tell you a bit more about that if you like.
Had you ever suffered prior to that? Had you experienced anything, any smaller episodes?
It's interesting because I think at the time I kind of thought it'd come out of nowhere because it was quite dramatic. I was very physically unwell. I was very, I was in a lot of physical pain. And actually I thought at the time I was having a heart attack, and it felt unlike anything I'd had before. But actually now, after years of therapy and sort of looking back, and I realised that quite an anxious child, always sort of very goal driven, always the next thing, never feeling quite good enough. I'd always had bits of insomnia, always a bit anxious about sleeping. So I think there were little sort of back squeaks, as it were. It wasn't like the full blown episode, but with a lot of therapy, looking back, I realised that the warning signs were there.
And would you say that? I think it was the Times you said you were working for at the time. Obviously that's a very high profile, undoubtedly very high pressure environment. Did that cause your problems? Did it, I guess, amplify them?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think up to about 2 or 3 years ago, I would have very much put the episode in the context of the stress that I was encountering, and I do think that was really important. So it was very high pressure. So the first episode was actually quite a while back, 1997, when I was in my 30s. And, even then it was a really 24-hour environment in the newsroom. So I think it's an issue that a lot of people have now with the digital world of like boundaries and when do you stop. But I could be rung by my news editor at sort of 10 o'clock at night, and he'd say, oh, look, The Guardian has splashed on some story. Could you do me a follow-up? And that would be writing 600 words, high speed, ringing my contacts. And I also think that, when we're thinking of psychological well-being, you really have to also think of the context, your family context. So my husband, still my husband, so he worked in finance. He was pulling all-nighters. He was sort of eating pizza, meeting deadlines. And we also had 2 small children. And the thing about that is it's very chronic, by which I mean ongoing, the stress of 2 small children, and it is also round the clock. And I mentioned to you that insomnia. So I think that sense of small children being up at night, and if you put that all together, that is quite a kind of cocktail of stressors. You probably have heard of this idea of a stress bucket. Everyone's got a sort of certain amount that they can deal with, and then if you add
I mean,
one.
I personally haven't, and I'm sure plenty of people listening haven't as well. So maybe tell me more about that. And
Yeah, so it's just the idea that we're all designed to deal with a certain amount of stress. So we're actually all the descendants evolutionarily of people who had a good stress response. Fear, fight or flight, the stress response came when there was a stressor. So we all ran away when we saw the lion, and we're all the descendants of those people. And so we are designed to have a stress response. And a stress response is fine in itself. So for example, like you mentioned, you're feeling a little bit nervy about the podcast. So at that point, you're feeling slightly stressed. You rise to the occasion, you focus, you do all the things that like your heart might beat a little bit faster to sort of pump the blood round, your mind would have focused. You dealt with the stress and you came through it, you completed the stress cycle and you were fine. And now we're having a good chat. So I suppose the idea of the sort of stress bucket and the stress response is they're kind of connected ideas, is that if you put in too many stressors in a sort of bucket of water effectively, so you add in a stressful job, a stressful relationship, your partner's got a stressful job, you've got small children, the bucket overflows and it's just too much and you become overwhelmed, and you can, instead of having a short-term appropriate stress response to something, which is, my news editors asked me to write a stressful story, asked me to write a story, I deal with that, I cope, I manage, and I come back down, and the water comes back down to a manageable level. Basically, the idea is that you just got too much. You can't cope, and your stress response stops working effectively, and you can't deal with the stressors and the anxiety that you're facing.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah. So I think, as I say, I very much took that outward approach to what happened to me before, that it was a lot about circumstances. And I think as I've got older, I've become a bit more nuanced. And now I think that it is true. People who are anxious or facing a lot of stress, circumstances do matter. But there's this big bit of us, which is how we decide to approach circumstances. So it is also what's going on inside us. The idea that for all of us, our main relationship is with ourselves. We do have a capacity to choose how we respond to these outward stresses. So in my case, I had a lot of stresses, but what I hadn't done is any work on myself, looking after myself, my relationship with myself, how I chose to respond. I mean, there were things I could have done. I could have said like, hey, you're giving me too much work. Hey, I need my mum to come and stay to look after the kids for a night. Hey, I need you, my husband, to take over. I didn't do any of that. I didn't have any sense of sort of looking after myself or self-care or how I might respond to the stressors. So I think that's how I now look at it now, that it's a bit of both. It isn't just the stress you're under that can lead to serious anxiety-driven depression, but it is also how you choose to respond to it.
It's interesting when you say about how you choose to respond to it, because I go to every year I go to what I call my fat camp, and September, October time I go on a kind of a 10-day juice cleanse at some kind of detox retreat somewhere, normally in Portugal or Spain or wherever it may be, and I always go on my own. It's always quite a nice chill time, but I was there last year. And it was a new hotel, never been to it before, and I went to see the various different people of the different disciplines. So spent some time with an acupuncture lady, spent some time with a chiropractor, spent some time with an aesthetic medicine type lady, and with all of them, we're having a bit of general chit chat before we got into whatever their discipline was, and they all said to me, how are your stress levels? And I'd always say to each one, 0. I'm very relaxed. I've got no stresses at all, because that's kind of how I'd always felt up until that point. And every one of them, all completely independently, every one of them said, "Well, why are you lying to me? I'm looking at you, and you've got the shoulders of an incredibly stressed guy, or the tongue of a or whatever it was they look at. They're all saying to me, you look incredibly stressed. You're like one of those stressed people we've ever seen." And I was saying to them, "No, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm cool, honestly. I'm very relaxed, always in a good mood."
And I went back to my room after 2 or 3 days of this. I'm thinking, why the hell are all these people telling me I'm so stressed? When to me, I'm not. I think it was only then that it really actually dawned on me that, you know what, I actually am, or maybe or certainly at that point, I actually was probably unbelievably stressed about many, many different things. But it's just that I guess I just got on and dealt with it, or hid it well, to 99% of the outside world. Because I guess I took the view that I just need to get on and do the things, or get on and perform. And I actually, when I sat back that night and realised that, you know what, I actually am, pretty stressed about many things. I sat down to kind of write down what I thought the things were that were winding me up or causing me stress. And it's funny because most of them, well, not most, I think all of them were to do with relationships with other people. I don't mean, not boy-girl relationships or even friendships, but primarily work-related things where I was hiring people that weren't performing. And I was ultimately, getting wound up that I'm paying these people and they're not delivering. And, I guess, one layered on top of two, layered on top of 3, 4, 5. And I sat down in my bedroom that night and wrote down all the people I was paying that were doing, that just weren't delivering for me. And I woke up the next day, rang them up and either fired them or cancelled the contracts and canned the outflow of cash. And then I just felt like, even though I didn't realise I was stressed the day before, my shoulders took a big and all of a sudden I was genuinely very relaxed again. Although I think 12 months on, that's built up, and I've now got another batch of contracts I need to cancel so I can be relaxed again.
Well, listen, hats off to you, because that actually, well, as you say, with the help of those experts at that course, you had that self-awareness of actually being more conscious of what was going on and what was going on, especially in your body, because stress does have a kind of completely, in the old days, we split mind and body. There was this French scientist called René Descartes that gives us the word Cartesian, and the Cartesian model is a sort of split of mind and body. And that's actually still how a lot of people look at mental health, that it's all just up in your head, where it's actually absolutely isn't. And stress is also bodily and it is embodied. So it's very interesting that, you had to bring your awareness and realize what was going on. And I was exactly the same. I mean, when I look back at what happened to me, it's amazing how incredibly ill I was. And I was in complete denial, that it was something going on with my stress levels and my emotions and my psychological well-being, and what was happening, in all the sort of stories in my head. And what I absolutely didn't do was actually what you then did, was actually do something about it. So my thing just got worse and worse. Like, my heart was racing. I was very nauseous. I was throwing up, and I had these sort of racing thoughts, like, if I don't get sleep, I can't get to work. I can't get to work. I'll lose my job. I'll lose the house. I'll lose the children. This sort of very catastrophic thinking. And by the time this sort of went on, and like I was getting iller and iller. I mean, I was just in such pain. As I say, when I got to the hospital, I still didn't think it was anything to do with stress, psychological well-being, how I was approaching things. As I say, I just thought it was a heart attack. And the doctor said, no, this is like an anxiety-driven major depressive episode. But the problem was, for me, by that point, I was so ill, and the illness had sort of gripped me. And, it wasn't a question of quickly, maybe coming down to a 4-day week, or, as you say, reorganizing some of the relationships around me, maybe saying I'd rather work with a different news editor, all the things I could have done. And yeah, I was pretty ill for 6 months, and I was in this hospital, and then I became really suicidal. I was sort of screaming, saying I want to die, and because I just felt so ill. And then, you're not going to really believe this because it just sounds so crazy. So there's much more awareness now, as you said in your introduction. But in 1997, I just went back to work, and I just didn't change anything. I didn't think of changing, my circumstances or my approach to my circumstances. And, my luck held for a bit, but then I had another really bad depressive episode, and it was a similar way. Started with insomnia, then all these horrible sort of stress response syndromes. So the fear, fight or flight response. So, your heart races to pump more blood round. You empty your stomach so you can run faster. Your mind's racing to grip the fear, but you never end that response, and you never actually change anything so that you're not in this incredibly stressed state. And then again, it morphed into serious depression. And yeah, that time I was ill best part of 2 years. And, amazingly, it was only then, after having been so ill for so long, because then I started on a whole load of medication, so antidepressants, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medication, and then I had lots of problems adjusting to the medication, and I was a zombie for a lot of the time. And it was only really after that been going for the best part of 2 years, which was about 10 years ago, that I thought, okay, maybe my body's trying to tell me something. Maybe there's something I need to look at in my circumstances and how I look after myself, that I can't cope with this level of stress. I've got to do something about it. But that was how far I pushed myself, which just seems really crazy now.
So let me ask you something then, which is almost like the opposite of what you and I have just been talking about then, and I guess probably not a particularly PC question in today's world, but obviously you talk about the fact that after your episode, you kind of you didn't fix it, and you just got back on with it and went back to work.
Yeah.
Because I was talking about the fact that I didn't even identify I was even stressed at that point, and like lived in denial, let's say. For me, I feel there's a massive culture of the opposite of that nowadays, that everybody's got anxiety, everybody's got and it's almost like, I'm not going to say fashionable, but anytime anyone has a problem of any minor degree of magnitude, it's almost like a get out to say, I've got an anxiety issue, or I've got a mental health issue. When ultimately, in many aspects of life, many aspects of business, the bottom line is that they are going to be high pressure, high stress things. If you want to get well paid to do a job, or either if you're going to be a doctor in a stressful environment, or you're just trying to be a successful business person, or you want to be a lawyer and work to deadlines, etc. These things undoubtedly come with deadlines, which bring pressure, but are to a degree part of the real world. And I'm not for 1 minute, playing down, real people with real problems. But what's your opinion? I mean, what is your opinion on that? Nowadays, everyone just uses it as an excuse to not do what they need to do.
Listen. Okay, so a couple of points I'd make on that. I think the first point is about language and how we describe things. And I think you're absolutely right that there's a problem, because there's different things. There's a mental health condition when you're suffering from severe depression, and then they're saying, I'm feeling depressed. And they're obviously not the same at all. There's a difference for feeling anxious and actually suffering from anxiety as a mental health condition. So what I would say is that if you took the entire population, by far the biggest two topics on mental health generally, for say 95% of the population, are anxiety and depression. And I would say of that 95% of the population, a very small percentage have a mental health condition whereby it's more than, as you say, what we expect: everyday stressors, learning to cope with them, ways of dealing with self-care. And there's been a confusion because the two things have got muddled up, partly because the language isn't clear. And what I would say for that very large cohort, which is some data at the moment is saying 10 million people are suffering from anxiety. And
in the UK or the world?
UK, just in the UK. And it's crazy because
it's not possible.
People, first of all, they're not suffering from anxiety in the way that it's a medicalized condition, which completely is debilitating, and you cannot lead your life, you cannot do your job. That is a very different thing. I think we've got to be really careful now that big, as I say, there's sort of the 95%. We don't go down a kind of medicalized solution. We don't label them as having a mental health condition. We can be sympathetic and alongside people and say, yes, people have stressful lives, but there are really good ways of looking after yourself a bit better. That does not mean to say you have a mental health problem. You do not have a mental health condition. You do not necessarily have to go on any kind of medication, and you do not have to bother the NHS. For most of those people, the big change, and you already nailed it, is relationships at work. So for people who are in work, obviously your mental health is affected by your life at home, other areas where you basically spend your time. But for a lot of that big main cohort, if we had a more supportive and encouraging workplace where people could be a bit more flexible, a lot of that depression and anxiety, I think, would diminish. So I'm actually quite positive that there are things that we can do that do not need to go down the medicalised route. Now, I would say that there is a different group, and there is a sort of 2 or 3% group, which is quite different. They're not people often in work. They've got poor housing. They've often had adverse childhood stress. They have things like schizophrenia, psychosis, a whole nother world of mental health, which is not really the mental health you see in the headlines. It's not really the mental health that you hear very often about the celebrities. Most of the celebrities that talk about mental health, they're on the sort of more safe mental health, as it were, which is, as I say, is back to anxiety and depression, which is much more fluid and much harder to sort of, much more muddled up. But as I say, there is this 2 or 3% who do have much more severe and serious problems, much more long term. And I think, the way that the sort of mental health conversation has gone, we're
to me,
yeah. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say to me, and it may, like I say, it's probably, wrong, or I'm sure probably considered inappropriate to say, but to me, this 2 or 3 or 4% that you talk about, the ones with psychosis or schizophrenia, I feel that those people are almost getting ignored.
Absolutely.
Because the world's been taken over with some 19-year-old girl who says she's got anxiety issues because she's been looking at Instagram all day and only 7 people have liked the picture.
You nailed it, and it's a very, very serious problem, because the thing is if the sort of 95%, as it were, decide that they've got this medical condition and that they've got to rush and get NHS help, I mean, there's no way the NHS can possibly cope. And absolutely, as you say, the ones that do have a really serious problem are not getting the focus, and they're not getting the support, and they're being muddled in with people who do not have a mental health problem. They just have everyday life stressors, everyday, stress.
I'll tell you, I was trying to hire someone recently, and anyone who listens to me regularly will know about my daily and weekly moans about the difficulties of trying to hire staff in today's climate. And I was trying to hire a guy, a digital marketing position, guy who wanted to work from home. No, I have a completely different conversation for another day, but I'm not a fan of the work from home culture. However, I've come to the realization that I have to embrace it if I'm going to continue to be an employer in today's world. So I will consider hybrid scenarios for the right people. For this particular guy, he said he wanted to work from home for 5 days a week. I said, it's absolutely not going to work for me. But whilst we get to know each other, you can do 2 to 3 days in the office, 2 to 3 days from home. And when we're comfortable with each other, and I know that, you're doing the work when you're at home, we can talk about it a bit more. And we got through 2 or 3 or 4 hours of interviews, of tests, of what do you call it, practical examples. And the guy then accepts a job he says he really wants, because of wants to work with me, wants the varied scenario, etc. A couple of days before he's supposed to start the job, gives back word, because he says that he's done a test run on getting to the office, and he's been on the bus, and taking the bus from his house to my office is not going to be good for his mental health, and is going to give him mental health issues. Now, I'm sorry, but that, for me, that is just unacceptable to use those kind of words. For what? Now, again, look, I could be being completely unfair and inappropriate and diminishing the problem, but to me, the guy just wants to sit at home all day. He doesn't want to take the bus, and it's an insult to anyone with a genuine mental health issue that he wants to use those words to get out of taking a job on.
Well, look, I sympathise, and I think there's a lot in what you say, but I think if we go back one layer, the problem we've got is that there is no blood test to say you have a mental health problem. There is no brain scan yet, which you could go to a doctor and show that something's wonky in your brain. We only have a kind of self-diagnosis, effectively. It's something called the DSM, the Diagnosis and the Statistical Manual, which is basically what it means is that if you're not feeling great, you go to see a psychiatrist and you self-diagnose what you think is wrong. And there's about 30 questions. And the first question says, are you sleeping more or less than usual? Are you taking more or less joy than usual in normal activities? Do you have some of these other symptoms? And you more or less, can diagnose yourself. And people who are skeptical, they've done sort of what's the word? I can't think of the right word, but basically they've got the same person go to 6 different psychiatric hospitals and come out with 6 different diagnoses. So I'm not saying that the profession of psychiatry is, they're not charlatans. They are trying to help people. And it is true that some people are very seriously ill, but there is a problem with diagnosis in mental health conditions. And I think that is something to bear in mind. And in some ways, because I was just so incredibly ill, I'm trying to tell you, can I give you a sense of how ill I felt? It was a bit like...
yeah, I was going to ask that.
Yeah, have you ever had did you ever have toothache when you're going to have a tooth out without anaesthetic, like you're in screaming agony? Or another way I thought of it is, I don't know if you've ever been on a plane when you're going to do a crash landing and you're sort of like this and your stomach's gone crazy and your head's going crazy and you think the plane's going to crash. And it's like that, but it just never stops. So I'd be screaming, going, I'm going to crash, I'm going to crash. And I mean, it was very extreme. And in that sense, I think I wasn't lucky, because I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I was lucky in the sense that there was no question that I was obviously very unwell. But you're quite right that it is already structurally a difficult area. People say it's like breaking your arm. It isn't like breaking your arm. We don't have the same diagnostic tools. So there is always going to be a degree of confusion about diagnosis and who actually's got a problem and who hasn't. So yeah,
tell me, when did you? I mean, obviously, in the depths of those, horrendous feelings for yourself, when did you actually see the light at the end of the tunnel? What made you realise that you actually could come through this and could recover?
Well, it wasn't like a sudden moment. So I remember the doctor saying to me, it was a bit like, if you imagine the outline of sort of Himalayan peaks, you get a bit better and then you drop back down, and then you get a bit better and you drop back down. But then little by little over time, the line smooths out and you begin to sort of, slowly be able to do things like dress yourself, wash yourself, feed yourself, all the sort of basics like, you really couldn't do. And sort of little by little, you start, the ups and downs become less extreme and it starts to sort of even out. And then little by little, then I came out of hospital, and then there was a big moment when, I could go to the hospital as an outpatient, and then, there was little by little with sort of adjusting the medication, and then little by little coming down and coming off the medication. So there were sort of steps to recovery. I think psychologically a big moment for me was that it felt like really pointless. Like, oh my God, what, this is just a utterly useless and dreadful experience with absolutely no value. And my mum was sitting by my bed, and I love poetry, and also I'm religious, and she would be reading bits of the Bible and bits of poetry, and she read me this line from Corinthians, which is in the Bible, and she said, "My grace is sufficient for thee, my strength is made perfect in weakness." And that line was a real turning point. My strength is made perfect in weakness, because it gave me a sense that there was some point to this experience. So my strength I would come through stronger. My strength would be made perfect through this weakness. And it is true that I don't think it was really true the first episode, because I didn't really bother to change anything or look after myself. But after the second episode, I really then put a lot of work into looking after myself, and I do now feel super duper stronger than before. And if I come back to that idea that your main relationship is with yourself, then I feel I've got a much better relationship with myself, and as a result I have much better relationships with people around me.
So let's talk about things that people can do, I guess either as a preventative measure or a recovery measure. And obviously, like you say, your case was very extreme, and I know it involved medication. I mean, was yours an unfixable situation without medication, do you think?
I think at that extreme suicidal point, I was just screaming for the medication, because I felt so desperate that I think now, once I started recovering, so especially after the second major episode, I started pulling in other ways to get better. And if I was addressing people about like how to look after yourself, I suppose one of the things I would say was bear in mind that principle of that mind and body are completely interconnected. So all those things about, like the exercise and, it's like a mild antidepressant, getting enough sleep. There's a big field, nutritional psychiatry, and actually I've done a few books on, just leaning across, I've done a few books on sort of ways to look after yourself, but one of the things I did, I don't know which way, that way. A book called The Happy Kitchen. Yeah, so one of the things about 5 years ago, I went to see my GP, and I was doing some of the mindfulness and some of the breathing exercises, and I'd done a lot of therapy. So therapy is obviously more a psychological approach, and I can come to some ideas there which were really helpful for me. But as I was leaving, she said, what about happy foods? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, oily fish. Yeah, dark chocolate, got magnesium. And I said, oh, wow, I've heard of diets for cancer. And she said, well, there's this new field, nutritional psychiatry. And I've got really into it. And I did do this book, The Happy Kitchen. And it is true that our mood and our food are very connected. So you remember that idea, the two systems, mind, body, same thing. So I think it'd be fair to say that in the old days, very simplistic, but we used to think that mental health was just in the head. And now we think that there's something called the vagus nerve that links the head and the stomach. And doctors now talk about the stomach and the digestive system as like the second brain. So we send as many messages from our stomach to our head as our brain to our stomach, as from our brain to our stomach. This is sort of constant messaging. And so you'll have heard of serotonin, the happy hormone people say. So 90% of it is made in your gut. So this whole idea of improving your gut health, improving your mental health. So I think that's a big topic of just realizing the interconnectedness and then actually putting into action some of these sort of physical strategies. But then, as I say, there's some really important psychological approaches that have made a big difference as well.
And what about advice and tips for how you can deal, or maybe how you can identify and deal with family members, work colleagues, friends who are suffering?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Well, I think that notwithstanding the fact that, as you say, a lot of people are now having this conversation and talking about mental health in a way that they certainly weren't when I started. Well, I mean, I really started working as a sort of advocate and researcher and knowing about this area about 2012. So, I mean, it has changed a lot, the landscape. But in certain worlds, there still is quite a bit of stigma. And people don't think it's kind of, job enhancing to put their hand up and say that they're finding life difficult. So one thing you can do, which I found quite effective, is you might want to start with a physical topic. So you could just say something like, oh, you look a bit, you're looking a bit tired, are you okay on your sleep, or something like that. So you can start quite gently on a physical thing, and then that might elicit an openness about something more psychological that's going on for them, like rumination, they're going round and round in their heads on worry or catastrophic thoughts, or some of the sort of negative ways of thinking that are associated with anxiety and depression. So that's quite a good way, is, start with a little physical thing. Another thing is just to, make it very small. Don't say, oh, Matt, how are you feeling about the world, the universe, life? Just say something like, how was that coffee, or how was your lunch, or just something very small, and just, again, starting to see if you, because a little bit like you were saying with that employee, like build a bit of confidence, bit of trust, and then try and work out what's actually happening to that person. So yeah, I think sort of keeping it low key, maybe going in with a physical idea. Those are both good strategies.
So, and talking of good strategies, I think you've got 6 books now, haven't you? 6 books that undoubtedly are full of good strategies, advice, and stories. Give yourself a plug. Tell us about some of the books and the content, and where we can find them. Presumably, they're all on Amazon and eBay.
Yeah, so I suppose it sort of slightly depends. I don't know sort of what stage you're at. I mean, I think my first book was called Black Rainbow, and it's a sort of memoir of this time of being really, really unwell. So it's more for really feeling pretty desperate. And at that stage, I had to really go deep, spiritual, I'd say. And that was partly why poetry meant a lot to me. So that book's got sort of 50 really amazing poems to sort of hold on to and recite and tell yourself a different story, often in the most stunning and beautiful language. So, you know, it's not me writing the poems, but, you know, these are the greats, you know, the great writers, you know, Gerald Manley Hopkins or Eliot, or, you know, incredible writers who sort of, you know what suffering feels like, and you can feel that they're on your side. So I'd say that would be the book for real desperation. I then did a book called Walking on Sunshine, which was much sort of more light touch, really. And it was for when I was already, you know, able to cope more or less, but beginning to sort of build up this sort of toolbox. And there's some sort of physical ideas in there. So one of those strategies is using some of the breathing exercises. So I do like the breathing exercises because if you think about anxiety, you're often throwing into the future, like you're worried about something that's going to happen, or you're regretting the past. So like when I was really ill, like, oh my God, I won't get to work, or damn, you know, I've taken on too much, you know, I shouldn't have said I could look out for the children tonight, or whatever it is. But essentially you're not in the present. And this might sound really obvious, but you can only breathe in the present. And if you breathe in a particular way, which is basically always in through the nose, because there's little hairs on your nose, get that air to the right temperature and stop the bugs. And it's always out through the mouth. But you always do the out breath longer than the in breath. Now that triggers the relaxation system, and it brings us into the present moment. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but it triggers a relaxed response. And so if you're relaxed physically, you're relaxed mentally. If you're tense mentally, you're tense physically. And it allows you to come to a better decision about whatever is stressing you at that point. So that book, Walking on Sunshine, has got quite a lot of physical strategies, some of these breathing ones, a few others, some of the nutritional ideas. But it's got a lot of psychological strategies as well. And I'd say that quite a lot of them are about this idea of your relationship being with yourself. So one of the big things for me was not looking for yourself where you're not. So by that I mean needing outward approval, outward affirmation, other people telling you that you're marvelous. So my life was always about, I needed the news editor to say I was okay. I needed my husband to say I was okay. I need you, Matt, to say I'm this brilliant guest on your podcast. And I've got to
don't worry, I will.
Whatever. But what I'd like to feel now is that, lovely if you do, but you know what, I'm okay anyway. So that's a big psychological change. And there's a few ideas in that book about how to stop looking for yourself where you're not. One image I like is not just like, it's almost childish, like having to pat yourself on the head, you know, needing somebody to pat you on the head, like pat yourself on your own head. You know, you're just okay anyway. So that's one big sort of psychological shift. And I think the other one that I've written about quite a lot is sort of moving away from a goal-driven approach in life. So telos is the Greek word for goal. And most of us live by goals. And of course, we do have to have goals, you know, finish the book, get the podcast done, you know, do your show. But if you can have a bit of a more atelic approach, so it's just a sort of tilt of the rudder, which is more being process driven. So enjoying the process. So we're just having this great chat right here, right now. We're not thinking, whoa, this is going to go viral. You know, I'm going to suddenly be super famous. It's going to do this. It's going to lead to some goal. I'm just enjoying it in the process right here, right now. Anyway, so that book's got some stuff there. And then actually quite related to what we were talking about earlier, I did another book called Singing in the Rain. And that is a workbook that you fill in, sort of take agency and feel empowered, rather than always blaming other people or blaming circumstances or, you know, blaming everybody else, is actually saying, you know what, I have some agency. I can look after my mental health. So that it's full of exercises you can do. And then I did the one about nutrition. Yeah, and my mum died a couple of years ago, and I've just gone back to poetry for the next one because I had to go deep again. Yeah.
Well, a book. I guess a book for every occasion and every stage.
In a way. Yeah.
It's been great. It's obviously been great having you here, Rachel. And I'm sure the guys at home are going to want to learn more. I'm sure some people are going to want to find and download some of your books. I mean, where can people find you? You got a website? You got an Instagram?
I have. I never remember all the details, but I think it's rachelkelly.net, and then I'm on Instagram, Rachel F. Kelly, and then my books, that they're on Amazon. I know we're not really supposed to say that, so they're on Waterstones.
Of course you can. You can search on Amazon. No rules on here.
Okay, and they're pretty. Most not all bookshops have got them, but you can certainly get them online. And then I'm on Twitter as well. So I mean, I use the social media to sort of share fresh research, what's going on, and because there's a lot happening in this field, actually, especially in the nutritional psychiatry. So that's what I try and do with the social media, and just stay connected and hear what people's issues are actually.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure I give you a plug so the guys at home can know where to find you as well. And Rachel, thanks again for being here. It's been great to chat to you. And as we said at the beginning, such a relevant and topical subject at the moment. Guys, thank you very much for listening to me. As always, if you are watching the videos, you can get me on the audio stuff on Spotify and on iTunes. If you're listening to the audio after the fact, I'm on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and pretty much anywhere you want to look from a social perspective. I'm always the Matt Haycox. That's TheMattHaycox. If you like what you listen to, press like, leave me a comment, give me a share, tell your mates, and leave me a review. And until the next time, I'll see you soon. Thanks again, Rachel.
Thank you.
Hey guys, it's Matt Haycox here, and we've got a slight change of pace and I guess a different mood on today's podcast. I'm here with Jo Hemmings, who is a TV psychologist and also a behavioural psychologist. You may have seen her on Good Morning Britain, to name but one. And today, well, just to put this into context, we're filming this 2 or 3 days after the passing of Caroline Flack. And as a lot of my regular audience will know, I film and record with reality stars and other people in the public eye, and we're always talking about anxiety and trolls and the pressures and social media issues of fame. So when I had the opportunity to talk to Jo, I thought it was a very topical and timely moment, but also I think something really interesting and important for you guys watching and listening, and also for some of the guests I've had, and I'm sure I'll have again in the future. So Jo, thanks a lot for being here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Great, me too. Thank you so much. So it's like, the kind of trolls have taken over the world. They're the loudest voices, and social media depend on that. They depend on engagement. So I work sometimes on TV, a lot of it behind the scenes. So I work with reality TV contestants from different shows. I work with people considered to be vulnerable who are going on news shows and documentaries, have a private coaching practice, which is celebrities and mere mortals. So generally I write, all sorts of things around, so psychology, behavioural psychology is kind of what I do, and then there's ramifications of all that, a lot of it associated with the media.
Now, when we talk media, obviously you say you look after celebrities and mere mortals. Do you think that the kind of the issues are the same for both people? It's just amplified a lot more for celebrities, because of scale. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. Yes, of course, proportionally, it's worse for them. But I think one of the things that you do when you become a public figure or someone in the media eye is you lose your privacy straight away. So that goes. So you're no longer able to lead a life like popping down to the shops or going to the pub or whatever. So that's already gone, which inevitably encourages them to have a mask already. I mean, you've either got to go out in disguise or you've got to put on the kind of thing and say, hi, yeah, I'll take a selfie with you. Members of the public don't have that problem, but essentially, yeah, of course, if they're into difficulty on social media or anxiety issues are much the same for everybody.
And I guess talking semi-specifically about the two Love Island people who've taken their own lives, and obviously the Caroline situation as well. I mean, is it? Do you find it's one or two repetitive underlying issues with? Is it anxiety? Is it pressures of fame? Is it because they're just suffering something in their day-to-day life that probably many other non-famous people are suffering, but they feel it worse? I mean, what are these people going through, and what could they be doing?
It's sort of never one size fits all, obviously. I mean, if you take just anxiety as a thing in the first place. We all need a bit of anxiety. So hormonally, it drives something called cortisol. We need some of it. If we didn't have any of it, we'd just walk across a busy road and think, I'll be fine. So you need a bit of stress and also a bit of adrenaline for energy and so on. So you have to have some. But what happens when people get overly anxious or really stressed out? So these reality TV guys, the problem is they're going from ground zero, a nobody, to perhaps being on the most watched TV series on the planet, or in the UK anyway. And they have different reasons for why they suffer stress, but generally speaking, it's because of being, even though they're warned, and I give this voice of, or this talk of doom and gloom before they go into whatever show they're on, a lot don't want to hear it. I mean, they've got this far, and as far as they're concerned, it's just a kind of tunnel vision direction, and they don't want to hear someone like me saying, you might hit this problem, you might hit that. Some do. I'll tell you the ones who survive the best, and that's always the case, as those who have a plan B. So for those who say, yep, I'm going into this show not as the kind of catapult to be famous, but not even as a journey, but as a beginning, a middle, and an end of a journey. So I'm going in there for this incredible experience, which I've got this opportunity, I'll never have it again. And then I'm either going back to my old job, I'm going traveling around the world for a while, I'm getting married, whatever it is. When they know they're going back to something, they cope much better than those who see it as the beginning of something, because it's very difficult to predict where that journey is going. And if it isn't going the way that they see it, then yeah, that's when the problems start. And for the majority of reality TV stars, the vast majority of them, we never hear of them again, really, effectively.
And where do you think duty of care from the networks, the producers, etc. Where does that fit in? Where should it fit in? Has it improved? Over the last few years. Is there still a longer way to go?
Well, there's a longer way to go. Yes, it has improved over the past few years. So there was a government inquiry with Ofcom that was going on after the Jeremy Kyle suicide and after the last Love Island Mike Felicita's suicide, and that was putting together basically a set of regulations that TV production companies, channels would be obliged to follow. Now that was going in the right direction, and then it got stopped during all the Brexit thing just before the election, and they haven't reconvened. So where we are at the moment is there are recommendations in place, but nobody has to follow them. So you will get at one end of the scale a production company thinking, I don't want to spend this money, I don't need to, it's just another part of the budget we don't need to spend, so we'll do nothing, but might bring you up if there's a sudden panic because someone who's been on the show is now in a mess, and so they need to speak to somebody. Sometimes that's sort of like sticking plaster job. Right the way to the other end of the scale, which is almost being there during casting. Well, in fact, during casting sometimes, like sending out psych assessment tests to all those people who are being considered, analysing those, talking to each one individually, reporting at every stage of this. Then if they get through, and a lot don't, sometimes you just have to say no for whatever reason. If you can get medical tests, access to medical records, so much the better. A lot don't ask for that, which means we only have their own disclosure about what medication they may have been on or not been on.
Sorry to interrupt on that as well, but do you find, are there some people where you meet them and it's like clear, you can't go on telly because you're just a danger to yourself?
It's not always that obvious. I mean, the trouble is there's a conflict of interest. So sometimes the people the channel or production company really want to go on are those really vibrant, excitable characters, big characters they know are going to cause a stir and get a bit of audience. And they're the ones who may be perhaps the most vulnerable of all. So there is a difficulty there. We don't want 12 lovely, kind, nice people sitting around having a cup of tea with no conflict and no jeopardy, because that's going to make for boring TV. But you've got to weigh the entertainment value against somebody's welfare. And
onto these bigger shows, how far after the show finishes does the access to psychologists or the duty of care carry on for?
Okay, well, aftercare never existed at all up until probably 2 years ago.
Right.
I did it for people, but I did it just free of charge because I'd had a relationship and I wanted to know what was going on. Now, because of what's happened, a lot of companies do have an aftercare policy of, say, talk to them the day before the show is broadcast, talk to them a week after broadcast. That's probably it. But if they don't want to talk to you, and I've had instances where people just, they don't want to talk about it, then they can't do anything about it. And others where I think there should be a longer term, the bigger the show, the longer the sort of aftercare length of time should be, in my view.
Just going non-celeb for a minute, you know, in terms of corporate responsibility or day-to-day life. I mean, do you find, because mental health is something that is talked about so frequently by so many people.
Which is a good thing.
Do you think there are more problems now than there used to be, or do you think that it's just I guess that people are just more happy to talk about it than they were, or are some people, I hate to use this kind of terminology, but do you think some people use it almost like as a fashionable excuse for things as well?
Do you know what? I think it's probably a combination of all those things.
Well,
I think
saved you answering that.
Well, I've saved me answering. That's it. Next. Yes, people are under more pressure these days. You're expected to be available 24/7. So people, who are working business, they're not knowing when they can take time off, fearful of taking time out of what they're doing. That increases anxiety. The fact that people do talk about it more, which is a positive thing in many ways, but in other ways there's something called behavioural contagion, which means enough people come out and say, yeah, I'm suffering from this. Other people will come out, not exactly piggyback it, that sounds cruel, but will sort of say, yeah, that's happening to me too, and I can't go on with it. So it's a very interesting place we're at, I suppose, in terms of being able to talk about it, but perhaps not actually being able to cope with some of it.
And other than talking about it and understanding it, what's your advice to, and again, whether it's famous person or Joe Public, people being trolled online?
Okay, well, the standard advice is to ignore it, but I don't think that's necessarily the easiest thing to do. I think there is a need to see what somebody has said about you. We're compelled to view this. Yeah. Again, standard advice, report it. Unfortunately, unless they've got a gun to your head, quite frankly, Twitter aren't really that bothered about banning anybody from their site. I think the thing to do is put yourself almost in their shoes. Who are these people? Why are they saying it? Why are they trying to get to me? You can either engage. For some people, it helps them to engage. For others, it doesn't. You've got to look at your own coping mechanisms and think, how do you feel about challenging this person, or how do you feel about seeing it and then trying to pack it away? It so much depends on what they're saying about you and why. What impact is this going to have on your life moving forward, or is this the equivalent of fish and chip paper? By tomorrow they'll have moved on to someone else. I mean, try and get a sense of perspective on it, and take a bit of time out. If it impacts you, take a day or two offline, come back on with a fresh head and a fresh view, and that sometimes works wonders.
And do you think things like social media or reality TV have created is probably the wrong word, but have changed or made these problems worse, or do you just think it's the problems were always there and underlying? It's just an amplification of it.
Okay, so some people after the suicides last year, or the year before now, were demanding that all reality TV was banned. This was going to be the solution. Let's get rid of it all. Mm-hmm. But if you think about it, that's a kind of nonsensical. We need to be more responsible. Things like Great British Bake Off, they would count as reality TV, much more gentle end of it. But you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. But what I think responsibility, as I said, needs to be taken more greatly. But also I think what's happened with social media is it's become a pretty angry place, become a pretty nasty place. And the good guys have kind of left it a bit. Like, I don't want to be looking at a timeline full of this sort of stuff. So it's like, the kind of trolls have taken over the world. They're the loudest voices. And social media depend on that. They depend on engagement. They thrive on people engaging with each other, and quite often they're controversial views. So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Mm-hmm. You can't really change that you can be very selective in your own timeline. That's what I always say to people. You know, when I discovered the "you can't at me if you don't follow me" button, when I was trolled, it was just, oh my God, it was like Henny Penny. You know, the relief of not having to see this stuff come through. So there are practical things you can do, and there are psychological things you can do.
And just having a specific talk on that then, because like you said, you were trolled yourself. As someone who's, you know, giving this advice, you know, to other people, when it happened to you, how did you feel? You know, could you take your own advice, or did you feel really upset?
It was the weirdest thing. I mean, talk about physician heal thyself. No, I didn't expect it to feel as bad as it did. I actually sort of felt slightly sick. It started on a Friday night when I did a particular article for the Daily Mail. Mm-hmm. It was a big feature. It was generally along the lines of Meghan wears the trousers. Kind of, so I stand by what I wrote. Unfortunately, the Daily Mail put a very unpleasant headline up, which weren't any of my words. And nobody got past that headline. They just saw this and thought, wow, this is disgusting. Okay, so I saw it and thought, oh God, I'm in trouble now when I saw the headline. Then it starts to trickle through on social media on the Friday evening it came out. I was with a friend at the time. I was going, oh, don't like it. By Saturday morning, it was like a tsunami of hatred going for everybody that I work for. So all the TV channels, my publishers, my professional bodies, they're all tagged saying, get rid of this woman, expel her. She's a fake, she's a fraud, she's a racist, whatever. I don't want to go into those details, but yeah, I spent the Saturday under the duvet. I literally thought, I can't. I felt strangled by it. You know, I'm physically inert. I'm just sick. And yeah, for all the advice I've given over the years, to actually, the one good thing, the positive side of it is I've experienced it. That sickness, you feel sick to the pit of your stomach. I thought these are all lies, and the lies were getting worse, and I didn't know how to fight it. It's overwhelming. Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Did you talk to someone yourself?
I talked to other psychologists, yeah. Interestingly, yeah, great friend of mine who's very supportive of also a TV psychologist. I got some people wading in on my behalf saying Joe's always been brilliant to work with. This is absolutely not true. And they got it in the neck as well. And I had quite a lot of direct messages from celebrities and others saying, totally back you, I'm so sorry you're getting all this shit. We totally get you, you know, you're marvellous. But people don't want to get into other people's arguments. But yeah, I turned to another those actually reassured me. I felt comforted by those. Several weeks later, it hasn't really impacted my work. It seems to have gone away. But yeah, I turned to another psychologist who's been through the same sort of thing, and we swapped stories. And I would say that to anybody. Find someone who's gone through it, because knowing someone who's gone through something like that, come out the other side, learn from them, like a role model, someone that's the best kind of person you can talk to.
Let's talk about stress in the context of, well, I mean, as I've probably told you, my audience is small businesses, wannabe entrepreneurs, people trying to kind of find their feet in life, and a lot of my content's with celebs and reality people as well. They're all suffering, different levels of stress at different points. Can we talk about some practical tips that everyone can implement, when they're struggling,
of course,
and how to know when they're struggling?
I mean, a lot of it is kind of being self-aware of your own boundaries and keeping them protected. So saying no when you need to actually is very important, and that balance of work life, social life, and actually just having a bit of time for yourself is important. Excuse me. Other things, I mean, people talk about mindfulness and meditation. That just means a way of relaxing. It means a way of lowering your cortisol levels. It could be breathing exercises. It's the breathing in through your nose, breathing out through your mouth slowly. I quite often do that even when I'm about to go on TV, because you get a little bit of that over-adrenalized. It's fine, a bit of it. You don't want to go on that too laid back. But just to kind of calm yourself down a bit. In terms of, a lot of it is in terms of being overwhelmed. So to use a business phrase, like drilling down into what these things are, because they're very often cumulative. So try and isolate individual issues and try and deal with them individually. And that whole thing of change what you can, but don't fret about, change what you can, don't fret about the stuff you can't change is important. But getting into it individually, making lists and saying, okay, these are the issues. This is how I'm going to tackle each one of these. Because a lot of anxiety, high anxiety and high stress comes from that sense of being overwhelmed by it all and not being able to surface for air or to think straight.
A lot of the time, I'll be stressed if I've got multiple things on that need doing, and a lot of people's reaction to me always is, oh, you need a break, or you need to turn your phone off and go and have a week away. But my personal view to me is, listen, if I turn my phone off and went for a week
more
away,
stressful.
I'd come back more stressed because I'm going to be worrying about what's going on, and for me it's about fixing the problems rather than going to a yoga class.
Okay, well I totally agree. But for some people, they need to be. You've got that kind of. You know yourself well enough to know that you'd be more stressed if you couldn't be in touch. I'm very like you in that sense. So I go on holiday and I kind of still checking my phone, and people say take a week off, and you think, no, I might miss something.
Well, I think as well,
it's
what, you've used the word earlier in terms of self-awareness. It's what suits you as an individual.
But how have you learned to tell me about your most stressful time? How have you learned that those are your coping mechanisms? This is how you should be.
So I guess on paper, my most stressful time was my bankruptcy, both personal and business bankruptcies back in 2008, 2009. It's something I talk about a lot. But I mean, if you ask me if it was the most stressed time in my life, possibly no. Because I think for me, my biggest levels of stress come from the things that are out of my control.
Right.
And I know, like a minute ago, we were saying that don't worry about the things that you can't control. Kind of concentrate on things you can. But I guess for me, I'll be stressed when I have reliance upon other people. Let's say that that can't perform on time, or where there's a chain of events.
But you can, to a degree, presumably control that because you change those people if they're not performing the way that
completely. But that doesn't change. That doesn't change the stress there and then.
But it means that you've got a problem which you can solve ultimately. See, I think let's go back to people on social media again. What it felt like to me and what it must feel far worse to people in the public eye is that lack of control. You have no control over what people say about you. Yes, you can go back to the social media platform, usually Twitter, and say, this is happening to me, can you do something about it? They're not really very interested. They look like they've taken a bit of notice, but there's no human beings behind there judging that in any way. And that is out of your control. And worse, it could have an impact on you moving forward. So it's not just being out of control of that situation, it's kind of not having any control of your future because it's being dictated to by somebody else who's putting out damaging version of you. You can't.
I know it's easy to say when you're not in that situation, but I mean it's something that I get asked quite regularly by people, how to deal with the negative comments, or I want to people coming to me saying, look, I want to start creating content on social media or do a YouTube channel, etc. But I'm scared of the people saying negative comments about me, and my answer, which is how I genuinely feel for myself, is that I pity the people who were writing the negative content, and think really how bad your life must be.
And the truth is, everybody's going to get it. No one is immune to it at all.
But I guess, like you said, that is genuinely how I feel, and I don't lose any sleep over it. I mean, look, listen, if it became incessant and amplified, am I going to feel different? Who knows? I don't have that public profile, to find out. But it's. For me, I think it's always an important bit of advice to try and to try and take yourself out of it in that respect and think, what, if the stuff that they're saying about you isn't true, you're creating good content, you're doing good things, you've got enough people patting you on the back. How can you let this this guy, this girl, or this group of people take over and dictate your life?
I agree, and it's also about being resilient and robust. So, I mean, perhaps not every psychologist would agree with me on this, but I think there's a bit of fake it to make it there. So, unless you choose to broadcast what's been said about you on your timeline, people don't need to see very often that it's even been said, or the negative stuff on your YouTube channel. They don't need to see it unless you're drawing attention to it. So you just you ride through that storm with your head held high, and eventually it will subside, because if you don't give them back, these people are attention seekers, want something back from you. That gives them what they ask for, which is attention from you. Now, if you don't feed them,
I mean,
they tend to go away.
Personally, I'll either never engage or engage once with each person in a humorous, let's say, further self-deprecating manner or something, just for I guess amusement, and the fact that obviously conversely, as you said earlier, social media thrives off engagement, and as long as people are writing something on my stuff, then it's pushing it up the algorithm.
But in the early days of Twitter, it was, that's what it was. It was a level playing field. So the person you idolised, some of your icon, was there on the same platform with the same amount of characters to speak as you did. So I remember kind of dialogues, conversations, but it was quite cosy. We used to have tweet-ups back in the day, 2009, with people that I first met on there when I had like 50 followers. It was great. And then it becomes this huge, great thing that you no longer are able to manage, and you just got to get it for what it is, and talk to people about it. Just get reassurance, as I said to you earlier, from someone who's gone through it is so important, because you feel like you're the only person in the world that's suffering, when that's so far from the truth.
I mean, that kind of leads me as well to ask you, on a more global level, what do you think we can and should be doing, as a society, to make the world a better place for these struggling, for the people who struggle? I mean, again, obviously over the last 2 or 3 days, all of my social media, there's been petitions and calls for this and calls for the other. I mean, what do you think every mere mortal should be doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think that all helps. Actually, I mean, I think that Caroline's law against the sort of press, at least the salacious nature of their headlines. Sometimes presses need to be more considerate and empathetic in what they write, and make those headlines not so vile. Yes, a lot of hashtags of be kind, which is quite right. But at the end of the day, Twitter doesn't thrive on kindness. But I do think if people step back, and it's like counting to 10 in the middle of an argument. You're about to say something really foolish. You're in the heated argument, you go away, you come back. You've just had a moment of reflection, of consideration. If more people could do that before they just slam out a tweet, if they could think that this has impact on somebody else. If you think, I said about Caroline, in fact, she's somebody's sister, daughter, think of her on a human level. Don't think of her as a TV star. That's really important, that we get a grip on the humanity of the situation. We won't stop the papers publishing stories like it. We won't stop people saying bad stuff on Twitter, even if 20% of those people just stop for a second, as you would in the middle of an argument, and reconsider what you're saying, and that will make a huge amount of difference.
You just referred to Caroline's law. I mean, if that was actually to make its way into legislation, what would you like to see as the elements of that?
Okay, well, the interesting thing is, I don't think it will make its way into legislation, even though the last time I looked, it was at 500,000 signatures. What that is
just before you answer, why do you not think it will?
Because it's basically gagging the press. It's saying you cannot report on these kind of stories in case it impacts on somebody's mental health. I don't think, with the best will in the world, we're ever going to have a press, or perhaps should have a press that's totally gagged. But I do think we should have a press that is more considerate. I think we should have a press that doesn't put out those screaming 3-line headlines with a photograph that are so distressing to people. So I think there needs to be some sort of revising of the way that they present stories. I don't think we'll ever stop. And what I do think is interesting about the amount of people that have signed that petition, just simply saying, do you know what? Yeah, I've been guilty of this in the past, but I'm sort of fed up with it being like this. Something needs to change, and something does need to change. But I don't think effectively it's telling the press they can't publish this, because there's an appetite for it, including those people who are now sadly talking about her awful death now, are people that have been entertained by stories about her. So we have to ask ourselves where we are at this particular moment in time, and work our way through to a better place.
So I mean, obviously we've talked about the fact that probably a bit more is being done now to protect some of these people who are in the public eye. But do you think enough is actually being done, or do you think we're going to have some more tragic situations ahead of us?
Well, there's a thing called suicide ideation, which is just the concept, the thought of harming yourself, of killing yourself, which actually is much more common amongst celebrities than one might care to think, or people in the public eye. Is there enough being done? Well, it's almost a new one. I suspect not. So when stars are employed by the channels, which they are, I think the channels have a duty of care to those celebrities to look after them. Actually, one very interesting way you can keep an eye on people is looking at their social media platforms, what they're posting themselves, because very often I see this in all sorts of people, in my clients and celebrities and contestants. There is a mood change in what they're posting, or it becomes less frequent. There's something in there. I feel that actually TV channels could pick up on this when they're employing somebody who may not be actively working for them at the time, but they employ, and reach out to them and say, you okay? What's going on? I see your mood has changed on Instagram, on Twitter, or whatever it is. I think there's a lot to pick up on there, which makes duty of care for TV presenters actually probably an easier thing to do, or to take care of.
Well, listen, Joe, thanks a lot for being here. It's been a bit of a change of pace for my usual podcasts, but I think it's certainly interesting and important topics for my existing audience and I guess a lot of my guests as well. So it's been great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Just for the guys who are listening or watching, where can we find you? You Twitter, Instagram?
I am on Instagram but do nothing. So Twitter @TV Psychologist is where I'm most active.
So Twitter @TV Psychologist if you want to catch up with Joe online. Obviously, guys, make sure that you're subscribing to me. Press the subscribe button down below, and as usual, I'm on all the social channels at the Matt Haycox. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening, and thanks for being here, Joe.
Cheers. Thank you so much.